And we're back. And as we said before the break, we are going to be talking about some healthy relationship tips, and also we'll be focusing on some signs of abusive relationships and why it's so hard to leave. And joining us for this discussion via Zoom, we have with us Diana Shaw, who is an attorney at law and the executive director of the Child Development Foundation, as well as Dr. Anel Martinez, who is a psychiatrist. Good morning, ladies.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
And thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
This is a very important topic, and the issue of abusive relationships and domestic violence have definitely been at the forefront of several conversations over the past few weeks. Now, I suppose we can start perhaps with Dr. Martinez talking a little bit about how exactly we define abusive relationships and what abuse is.
Very well. So, abusive relationships tend to happen in the context of intimate relationships. So, within families or in couples. And usually, we want to say that the relationship is abusive. There's an age definition that both partners or one partner has to be above the age of 16, where one partner takes advantage of the other, whether be it physically, emotionally, or financially, and puts you in a position where you feel threatened or unsafe within that relationship.
Yeah. Let me step
Yeah.
back for a moment. You know, a part of this conversation is guided by the public discourse. And there's been such opposing views to an issue that we've been battling for a long time. Let me just get a sense of what your perspectives are. Some of the things that have stood out that you have heard or seen in the commentary over the past week.
Well, a lot, a lot has been said, most of it wrong. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank you for having this important conversation and for allowing us to be a part of it. I speak on this issue from two hats or two different levels, but which are connected. One as the attorney, in terms of the legal ramification of when we have intimate partner violence. It is a crime, and it is also a specific crime under the Domestic Violence Act that allows persons to access the family court for a civil remedy. But it also creates criminal offenses of harm, assault, and the various offenses under the criminal code that are also actionable outside of the Domestic Violence Act. I want also to remind the public that even if somebody goes to make a report and then this under the Domestic Violence Act and then decides to take back that report, it does not prevent them from making a second report when another incident arises, and it does not prevent them from taking action under the criminal proceedings in relation to criminal offenses that may have arisen, because I've seen some error statements being made with that. You don't lose your grounds for seeking your rights, and you don't lose standing before the court because you decide that you won't proceed in this particular instance with this report. Every incident of domestic violence is a fresh offense and creates a fresh cause of action. The other thing that I want to also say, which I've seen, a lot of people have been saying if somebody is educated, they should not be in a domestic violence relationship. I've seen comments to the effect that people who are educated should be able to leave. That is not true, right? Domestic violence, intimate partner violence is not the same as somebody grabbing your purse on the street and robbing from you. It's a different kind of violence. It's a kind of violence that affects the emotional, the psychological, and the inner personhood of a person. It is also violence that's connected to people that they have feelings of affection and connection to. So it is not that as simple as somebody walking you on the road and slapping you. That's you have no connection to a stranger who stops you, and you'll be very quick to want to seek legal recourse against them or to take vengeance. When you have feelings of affection for somebody who harms you, those feelings of affection affect how you respond and how you seek help. And it's even more complicated when those feelings of affection are based on wrong beliefs about your dependence and survival on that person, which then creates trauma bonds. So you're dealing with the violence, you're dealing with your feelings about the relationships, and you're dealing with the trauma bond that has been created between you and this person because of a pattern of abuse in that relationship and wrong power and control dynamics. So it's not as easy as people think. Over 20 years of working with women in domestic violence situations, we have had many successes in getting women out of domestic violence situations, but none of that is easy or overnight, and none of that is as simple as just getting up and walking away.
Yeah, yeah. And from you, Dr. Martinez, what's been troubling to see has been the level of judgment that's been hurled on the victim. Can you talk a bit about, here's the thing, there have been, and even more recent studies from Spotlight Initiative that show that we have all known or seen somebody who's been a victim of domestic abuse. Yet when we hear reports of it, it seems to be a very difficult thing for us to digest or accept.
Right. And I think the problem starts with our belief and our cultural practices, because to start off with, when people say, well, that's normal, you know, let a man beat their wife. It's not. So we have to start by correcting that idea that this is normal behavior. Because when we normalize it, it makes it even more difficult for the victim to find a problem with something that everybody else is telling them is normal within a relationship. To start with, so it's not okay to happen. It's not normal for anybody in an intimate relationship to beat up on the other, to insult or belittle the other, to threaten the other, or to withhold anything, financial, medical assistance, from his or her partner or child or dependent, because sometimes this also happens to people who are senior, and it's not something we talk about often, but it's a common practice. Yes. With the judgment, it's instead of us opening doors for victims to feel safe, to feel like there's a way out, to feel like there will be someone on the receiving end when they make that hard choice to leave out of a relationship, where they have maybe some form of financial stability, a sense of safety at some point, so many shared resources within that relationship. When they have felt so unempowered, you know, they feel defenseless, their self-confidence, self-esteem is below ground, where there's so much self-doubt. Who is there to empower them to say, you can leave, and when you leave, this is accommodations we have for you to leave. The judgment is not necessary. I think there is already enough shame. There is already enough guilt.
Yeah.
There is already enough self-doubt in that situation, that society should not inflict much more of it. Or telling the person that, you know what, when they come out of a relationship, they're looked at as weak, or they're looked at as toxic. Yeah. Or broken goods, you know, who's gonna want you after this, or what kind of relationship are you gonna find yourself in after this? And we need to stop that. You know, we need to be empathic, we need to be supportive, we need to find solutions. I think there's enough judgment as is, but who's willing to lend a helping hand? Who's willing to open a door for that person?
There's a video up momentarily, and I think it's a key point to talk about, because very often we think abuse is about responding in anger, when it really is a different core issue, which is a person who is unable to control their need for power and control. Can we get some insight on that?
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yep.
Go ahead,
I let you come in with this psychiatric viewpoint. But I will say that this power and control dynamic is at the root of every form of abuse, whether it's child abuse, domestic violence, which includes intimate partner violence, as well as violence against elders. It's all about the wrong power and control dynamics. And these are based on innate beliefs, core values that the person who is exerting power believes that they are justified or that they have a right to exert over the other person. And the other person not understanding or not being willing to accept that this is not the right way for them to be treated, and then accepting that treatment very often because they were raised that way, because they grew up in a home where they saw this same pattern being demonstrated, where this behavior was normalized as the accepted pattern for a relationship, or where they have wrong beliefs about their own value that they bring to the relationship. They may feel that they are dependent or inferior to the other person and accept that the other person has more rights or more power than them in the relationship. And so succumb or subconsciously accept that lower level of treatment that the other person exhibits. But without those wrong power and control dynamics, you can't have domestic violence. Domestic violence comes from this. This is the core part of it. So persons who are exerting power, who then act out and slap, are not doing that by accident. That's not something that is random.
Right.
They're not doing that because the other person suddenly burns the rice, or the other
Or
person
provoke
suddenly
them.
gets up and provoke them. They're doing that because inside of them, they have believed that they have the right to act this way. And they believe that they are justified in acting this way and acting in a way that is wrong, because they have wrong ideas about the power that they should have in the relationship. They have wrong ideas about the other person's value and about respect. And very often they have wrong impulse control. They believe that force or violence is a justified way to act when you disagree, right? And not that you should talk things out and have good communication.
Yeah.
So I would ask Dr. Martinez can maybe talk about what are those good things that you should look for. How do you know if you're in a healthy relationship? Because everybody knows when you're in a bad relationship. But I find that sometimes women don't know how to look for these good relationship dynamics.
Right. So usually in a good relationship, you want to feel supported. You want to feel safe. You want to feel as if though you have valuable contribution to the relationship. You want to also feel acknowledged that your contribution brings something to the relationship. You want to be connected to someone based on a level of equalness, but not because they are superior to you or because they have much more to give to you than you have to offer them. You want to be of service to someone in a relationship. You're not in the relationship for what you can get, but for what you are willing to give within the terms of that relationship. That's what constitutes a healthy relationship. You want someone to respect you, and you should also respect your partner. All right. There should never be you should always do your check and balances to see who you think is more important in the relationship, who needs to be pleased all the time in the relationship. Both of you have needs, and any relationship, both persons or more, because there's polyamorous now, both persons' needs have to be met within that relationship.
Yeah.
And you know, I just wanted to backtrack to one thing that was mentioned sort of in passing. And I believe Dr. Martinez, when we had first started the conversation, about defining abusive relationships, you did mention, you know, in terms of one of the characteristics that you're using is age, and one person, you know, being over a certain age. One of the aspects of abusive relationships, or some, I should say, which has also been discussed recently, is this issue of grooming, especially when one partner is significantly younger than the other. And perhaps you can give us a definition of that, and you know, what are the features of that type of a relationship and how that can lead to abuse?
Okay, so I think with any relationship where it leads to abuse, there's certain things we have to look at, right? And I think this fits into grooming too, where there's this really intense start to the relationship. You're on the phone all day, they're checking up on you via text, who you're with, where you're going, what time you will be back. There's also this intense show of affection, whether it be with physical gifts, with hovering over the person, excessive public display of affection, you know. So normally you're starting a relationship and there's just this level of intensity to the relationship, that could be a red flag. I'm not saying that all intense relationship will turn into abusive relationships, but that's how it starts. So I'm showing you that I love you and you are the best thing that happened in this world just before I start to isolate you. So I want you to spend more time with me because you're supposed to love me. You're supposed to want to on the phone with me. You're supposed to want to talk to me. You're supposed to be checking in on me or checking in with me about your whereabouts. And then guilting you into you should spend time with me and not with your friends. You know, we're in this relationship together now. It's about us. And so that lets you start to cancel engagements with your friends, with your family. There's a story of this guy who utterly proposed to this lady, I love you, you're the best thing that happened to me. I'm gonna quit my career, I want you to quit yours, and we're gonna move to a quaint town. Sounds all good. They get to the quaint town, and that's when he starts yelling at her, breathing up in her face, talking down to her, and then he apologizes. You know what? I didn't mean to, it's because of my trauma. You know, they blame all these other things for the root cause of their relationship. It's not about you, it's what I've been through. And that puts the person in a situation where they feel like, I am the strong person who has to keep my dysfunctional partner grounded. So they find a sense of purpose in that relationship.
Yeah.
Because I have to help him or her fight her demons. And that's exactly what your partner wants. Because that's how they take control of you.
But let me come back to this though, because we were talking about healthy relationships. I love what you said, because for me, when I hear that, it is at the core of why we victim blame. There's kind of a general acceptance that we, and the data shows 8 out of 10 domestic violence victims are women. So I'm just going with the majority here. But the general consensus is that we as women should be the one to ensure that our partner is content. You know, you don't fuel the fire if they're having a bad day already.
So that's a gender norm that needs to change, right? That's one of some of the wrong cultural dynamics that we have inherited that we need to revisit. Right. Because it actually is a grooming technique. It's something that is used for coercion and control, and you see that in all abusive relationships. So we need to definitely change that, and this is part of what we do with young women in our programs that we do in school, in our Rise Girls programs. We talk about dating violence and helping young women to understand the characteristics of healthy relationships, so that they can see where the wrong patterns that have been held up before them in their homes or in their communities need to be revisited, and they can start questioning some of this. The hope is that when they start having relationships, they will have a different mindset and be more willing to see those red flags earlier, so that they can make decisions for their own safety. There's the burden that society places on women to accept violence as a part of their responsibility to fix men is something that we need to break from, because it has created a lot of issues of gender-based violence and women not coming to speak out until they are severely harmed, until their life is in danger. That's when they are seeking help. Whereas we need them to seek help much earlier in the relationship. It's actually more helpful if they see those red flags earlier and begin to address it. One, they can get out. And two, if the partner is willing to seek help and they are confronted earlier, there's much more success of rehabilitation. Yeah. So it's very important that we start to speak about that we need to help women and men to see the red flags, to see where they are contributing to those wrong dynamics because of things that they may have grown up and seen, and be willing to do the work on their part to fix their own issues, because nobody else is responsible to fix your issues. You have to take ownership of your own baggage and your own junk and garbage and take it out yourself. So we need to ensure that we are giving people the right tools for them to recognize that it's not your partner's responsibility to fix your trauma. It is your responsibility to seek healing. And even if you're experiencing trauma, it is not okay for you to use that to manipulate and control your partner. They have their right to live in freedom and to be free from fear.
And I wanted to ask on that note, from both you and Dr. Martinez, because you said just now that a lot of the times people only seek help or intervention at the point where their lives are actually in danger. And I wanted to ask, just based on your experience, if that is the case, and when you do speak to victims of abuse, if they describe, what it is that took them to the point, or do they describe their history? Is it often the case that they have been in these, relationships for a long time, and if over time you found any features of these relationships sort of change or anything, perhaps with changing times over time, if anything has changed in these patterns?
Well, I'd say from a mental health perspective, it is true. I have to agree with Ms. Shah. They usually tend to complain about the relationship when they feel threatened, when there has been a very intense episode, probably in front of family members or friends. Maybe the children have seen them near death or, badly beaten, and that's when they want to seek help. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that. One, after every abusive incident, there's usually a honeymoon period where there's a seemingly sincere apology and a promise to change. And you being in a relationship have hopes for your relationship and you want to believe that it's going to change. So you stay. More than that, when you are in a relationship, you tend to attribute some of the abuse to your characteristics or something that you may have said or the way you said it, something you do, something you don't do. So you want to take a bit of responsibility for the abusive relationship. Yeah. Thirdly, even when people seek medical attention for abuse injuries, it's not taken seriously. I've heard some of the doctors at the ER tell abuse patients that, well, you know what, when I crawl up in a bed together and then in a be nobody business. So they don't seek to write out the medical legal form. The police is not informed and they go back to life. And I think that's a gateway that should be open to anybody suffering any form of abuse. When you go to that emergency room, I think the doctor should at least ask, what is the situation? Yeah. Are you safe in that situation? I don't care who perpetrated it, who started the argument. You're the person who's hurt. You're the person in front of me. I have to find the resources to be able to help you so that I'm gonna see you back into this emergency room or I don't find you in the morgue.
Can I ask a question? Let me take it from a different point of view. I think sometimes the frustration that we hear, and really it is a practice that has to be changed, where medical personnel, police personnel are dismissive of domestic violence incidents. But let's separate the situation here. If I'm an outsider looking in and seeing someone potentially threatening their life by being in an abusive relationship, they're being hurt, harmed, and the next step can be death. And from my point of view, it looks like they're choosing to re-enter that war zone. It can feel frustrating. Can you help us understand why that happens? Why do people go back? Why do people take back their statements? What's happening there that we on the outside may not understand?
So there's a lot of issues, but the first one I want to say is the issue of trauma bonds. And I will probably ask Dr. Martinez to speak a little bit more about that. Yeah. But when you are in a relationship, and as Dr. Martinez was saying, that you invest in that relationship with the hope that it's going to succeed. Like nobody enters into a romantic relationship and think, well, 3 weeks from now, he's going to hit me and we're going to break up. Like that's not the hope that you have. You are expecting that this is going to go well and that you're going to be happy and you're going to contribute to each other, raise a family, whatever the dream is that you have. You have a dream for that relationship. So you're invested in its success. So you begin to feel that these little things that happen are just obstacles that you have to fight through on the road to success. And then when the incident happens and then you have the honeymoon period and the person is apologetic, then you think this is the real person. Like this is the person that I really love and the person that I really want. I have to fight to keep this person. I have to fight to stay in this relationship so this person can come forward. not realizing that that's not the real person, that's the imposter. The real person is the one that has low impulse control, the one that is being disrespectful, and that's the person that you're actually going to end up with if this person doesn't take their own actions to address their own issues. So when you start to accept that and you want to stay in the relationship, you become dependent on this person. And you may become dependent financially, you may become dependent emotionally, you may become dependent even with your social standing. Your reputation become tied to this relationship and to this person. So then the decision, when you realize that this is probably not going to change or it's not going to work out the way that you are thinking, the decision to leave becomes very difficult, because now you have to think about how you will address those issues. Like, you may have fear that this person may have the power to come after you to harm you. Once you leave the relationship, the situation becomes even more complicated if you have children. And then we have women where, as Dr. Martinez has said, who feel that this situation of abuse was caused by their action, that they were somehow to blame. They may have been told as children that the woman should just be quiet and not speak up, and maybe she spoke up and said something, and now she feels, well, it's her fault. So she needs to fix it. So she needs to stay in and be more quiet and not say anything. So this is where the trauma bonds develop, because you develop this unhealthy attachment to this person that you feel that your survival is dependent on this person's actions, and that you need to comply and appease this person so that you can survive, or so that you can get what you think that you need to get from this person, from this relationship. It's very difficult psychologically to walk away from that. You actually need counseling help to break that bond. You're not going to be able to do that on your own. It's not something that intelligence or money or time will break. You need counseling help. Just like if somebody chop you with a machete, you can't stitch that up while you're bleeding on your own. You have to go to a doctor and somebody with the expertise as to put in the proper stitch and give you the proper treatment. This, when trauma bonds develop, you need counseling help to be able to break that.
And we haven't even talked about the element of shame that comes with it.
Yes.
And I was, when you think of making a report, it's publicly saying, and we get very tied to relationships. So even if it's not abuse, if it's a failed relationship, failed marriage, failed situationship, I don't know, you kind of mask the shame of it and what it takes to be able to report it. That's a lot.
Yes.
Anel, you want to talk about that a bit, how that is like one extra layer that victims are dealing with?
Right. So I think I think I mentioned earlier, when you're in that relationship, initially you feel like you have to be the strong one to keep it together for your partner who seems to be falling apart at any crisis. So one of it is the way you perceive yourself in the relationship. You can't be strong and battered at the same time. That's how most women look at it. And people within, women or men within that relationship on the victim side, do not want to seem weak or defenseless. Me admitting that my partner.
For some reason, we lost audio there. I don't know if you press mute.
All right.
Yeah.
I apologize. If I have been in this relationship to this point that it has escalated to when I look for help, because usually it has gone beyond the raising at a voice or just yelling, So I have stayed in there up to this point. I have lost so many friends and family member and my support system up to this point. So for me to go back to them and admit that I was wrong initially about this person, that I was wrong about my relationship, there's a level of fear in that, or shame in having to admit that all along I was giving a vote of confidence to my man or my partner. And now I have to come back and tell you guys, well, you know what? I was wrong and I'm sorry. And a lot of times, and I've heard this so many times, I went to my mom and my mom said, well, that's the life. You don't know to the house.
Yes,
I
you
was
may have
actually
been.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, if you could shed some more light, because that culturally, speaking of cultural norms, that's also another aspect that which I've heard stories of as well. Where they'll seek support and people will I tell them to go back to the relationship. In terms like you've just described.
Right? That's your choice.
That's the
Just
number
not
one
aggravate them,
barrier.
right?
Yes,
Right.
that's the number
Right.
one barrier to women getting out.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when they work up the courage to speak to somebody, the first person that they speak to actually determines whether they will go back to the relationship or seek help.
Right.
If that first person is not supportive, and usually it's a family member, or if that first person expresses any kind of doubt as to whether the violence occurred, or that person shifts any blame to the victim or defends the perpetrator, that victim will take a much longer time to speak out again and will actually subdue their personality and sink further under the control of the perpetrator. And the perpetrator will have a stronger bond over that person because of that, because somebody with authority in their life reinforces the wrong actions of the perpetrator. So as family members and as a community, we need to be supportive. We must always be supportive of women or men who speak out that they are victims of violence. Our first response must be a defense response, that we say to them, I am here for you. I will help you with whatever you need. I will listen to you if you just need to cry. If you don't want to talk to anybody else right now, if you're not ready to seek help, I'm still going to be here for you. Right. That is the response that we need to give them so that they can develop the courage to confront the trauma bonds that they will need to break in order to get out of this relationship. If that first response is not supportive, it's going to take a much more violent incident for them to feel that their life is in danger, for them to then seek help.
You have to validate any concerns or complaints that anybody gives you and it's related to violence. It has to be validated. Don't dismiss it.
And one other thing which we haven't really discussed as well in terms of what feeding into the fear of leaving the relationships is that quite often, these persons, particularly women, of course, will feel that if they do leave, their life will still be in danger. And we've seen cases, unfortunate cases over the few years where we've seen that happen, that somebody's finally left their partner and that person has gone after them, attacked them, or even killed them.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
I think it's safe to say that over 75% of domestic violence murders happened after the victims have left the abusers.
Yes.
And it's incredibly dangerous to think that you could just walk away from your abuser and there will be no repercussions. That's the point where they have nothing left to lose.
They're the most desperate. And this again is why families must support victims. You cannot expect that somebody who is in trauma, somebody who is in violence is going to be able to save themselves and just get out. That is not possible. It's not feasible. We need to give support so that they know that they are not alone, so that they know that there are people that will help them. We have so many cases. One of the things that we do when the counselors do with the person that comes in with domestic violence, they do the risk assessment to help them to identify what kind of danger they may expect or what they need to plan for in terms of the other person's actions. And then they do the safety planning to talk about how do you get out. And in some cases, they may have to say to them, you can't get out right now. We have to put some things in place first before we can advise you when is the right time for you to leave. So all of those things have to be considered, especially when you have children. So it's important for them to seek help from family and then for family to refer them to the experts, the counselors, the psychiatrists, the organizations like CEF, YES, BFLA, the doctor, the police, so that they can get the expert help that they need to put those tools in place. We should never just tell them, well, okay, just get up and left the man. The man wicked and him punch you, they'll come for you tomorrow and you'll leave. Unless you're going with a machete and some police, don't do that, right? Because that person is going to be desperate and it's likely to be violent then, and violence may follow the person afterwards. So you need to ensure that there's a proper plan in place that will look at the risks that they need to prepare for and plan for. And every domestic violence relationship when you leave will have risks that you have to prepare for and plan for. And then you need to put the things in place, so putting aside money. You may need to get a protection order. You need to have family members that are going to be on standby. You may need to change phone numbers. Some cases, we have had to have women change their jobs, change where they live. All of these things are things that you need to plan for. They are not things that you can do overnight. But you have to have a plan for an emergency so that after you seek help, because once you start talking to somebody, your behavior changes. So the person in the relationship with you is the abuser start to see that something is about to happen. So there's an alert that happens in their mind.
And
so
you're going to take away that one thing they want the most, the control.
Yes, so they start to get a little bit. So you have to have this emergency plan. So talk to somebody and get the help.
We can go on and on about this issue. I think there's a lot more to unpack about how we can help to educate ourselves and really change the situation. But let me just close with this one. If you're raising a little girl or a little boy right now, what can you do different to change or to impact how they're raised to have a different outcome, that they don't end up being an abuser or a victim?
I think having clear conversations with children about right and wrong and leading by example. You do not tolerate patterns of behavior that you don't want your children to learn, because that's where it's learned. And so you want to emulate good moral standing, how to treat people, how to be empathic, how to be caring for someone, how to make someone feel safe within the realm of a family, because those are the same types of behaviors or attachments that they will learn from home and take into any future relationship that they may have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Diana, for you, what do we as a society, what's your hope as a society that we
wake up, that we wake up and stop projecting our own trauma to victims? As a lot of the reason why we blame victims is because we haven't dealt with the wrong issues in our own relationships and we are projecting. So we need to deal with our own stuff, and so that we realize that it is not okay for people to be treated this way, and that we don't blame victims and shift our feelings of anger towards our own selves to them, and that we become more supportive. We recognize that we need to provide the help that they need, because people that need help just need help. That's it. And then also to add to what Dr. Martinez was saying, that as parents, we need to be real with our children about the things that we have experienced. Don't cover up the domestic violence that you endured in your younger years. Explain that to your child, what you went through, how you overcome that, or you went through that, because it will help them to see that when they experience something, they should speak out. We need to really empower people to speak out against violence and not to cover it up. That there's no shame in seeking help. There's no shame in saying that somebody hurt you. That's not your fault. That's the other person's problem. So you should not cover it up. You should speak out against it.
And, on that note, just very quickly before we close, perhaps we could just mention just a few resources or tips, just, whether it's, what's available for victims of abuse, whether it's to seek the services of an attorney, make a police report, seek counseling. Just in a nutshell, can you talk about what some resources are available?
I think I'll leave that for Ms. Diana.
Yes.
All right. So all of that, yes, you have the police. Every district in the country has a DVU unit, the police department. That is as somebody that's there to take a police report. If they don't want to take the report, contact the women's department attached to the Department of Human Services in your area, or contact an NGO. You have the Child Development Foundation, CDF, that's us. We are in Belmopan and 13 Garbutt Creek Street. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us, Google CDF. It will tell you where we are on webs. We have resources on our website, cdfbelize.org, or find a counselor that's attached. You have professional counselors like Dr. Martinez. You have counselors attached to the Department of Human Services, or a pastor from a church that you trust. But make sure that it is somebody that is willing to listen to your side of the story. If you're talking to somebody and they are defending the abuser or talking over you, you need to just shut down that and say, thank you for your time, and move on to the next person. That's not the person to help you. So make sure it's somebody that's willing to listen to you and that's willing to be supportive and to give you the tools that you need.
That's right. There's a
I guess
hotline
I
too,
will.
isn't there?
I guess I can add to that.
Yeah.
Because there is also the National Women Commission that have
Yes.
a hotline that you can
Yes.
use, and it's a 0800 a way out. That you can call. There are also, I think, 2 active shelters for women and children right now. And one of them is Haven House Shelter and Mary Open Doors Shelter. So in your area, if you know, I guess if you contact the Women Department, you can also get directions and contact information for these places.
Yes.
But definitely Women Department is one. Police department could be helpful because there should be a domestic violence protocol in every
Yes.
police department or station countrywide. Getting legal aid.
Yes.
And if you don't get through at the police department, you can also use the resource of the Ombudsman office. So that if anybody has caused you any additional violation in your experience, that's a place where you can also get help.
Okay.
Legal aid counseling. There's also programs where they have educational training or training for any trade so that we can give these women some level of independence as they move forward with their new lives. Because we have to give them the structure of something new that they can walk into. If there is nothing and you're leaving everything behind, it's going to be even harder for you to walk away from it. So that's what we have to offer them.
All right. Well, we appreciate the conversation this morning. And just to close off, that hotline, once again, is 0800 a way out. We're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we will be talking about the latest in the sugar industry. Stay tuned.